Welcome back to the Resilience Pod, the podcast helping you become resilient in our world full of disruptions. I'm your host, Rina Singh. Today's episode is centered around resilience by design and the difference between the systems that can make or break our organization. This is a real deep dive masterclass into technical enterprise architecture, the hidden dependencies and the design patterns that underpin whether we can truly recover when a disruption occurs. And to help us unpack this detailed technical episode, we have an highly sought after expert in the field who has traveled all the way from Italy and literally landed this morning, I'm not even joking, to give us a design inspirational insight into what architecture really looks like. So without further ado, welcome to the Resilience Pod, Silvano Sogus.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Irina.
You're welcome. I can't believe you literally just landed in the UK this morning. I love it. I love the dedication.
I'm really happy. I'm really excited to be here.
Fabulous. Now let's get into it, because this is one of the first very technical episodes we're having on the Resilience Pod, and really excited to delve deeper into what does resilience by design mean and what is architecture. And so we're going to set the scene a little bit in this first segment. So my first question to you, it's quite basic, is, well, how do you define architecture? What does it mean? And how can we as resilience business continuity professionals make it easy to understand?
So when I normally am asked to define architecture, I come to some examples. Mm-hmm. The best example that comes to mind is if you ever tried to draw, figures, faces, and so on. I tried all my life to do that, and I never get better than a 7th grade child.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is you try to do the details, and then you maybe do an eye here, the mouth. And maybe you get better in those details, but the overall thing doesn't fit together. The eye is a bit, it seems like a Picasso picture, but I'm not Picasso. And instead, when you look at professionals, what they do is they maybe draw an oval. They draw a line to define the orientation of the head. They draw another line to define where the eyes should be. Then they draw a line between the middle of the eyes and down, because the mouth normally is that space. And I'm pretty sure in their mind, they know already how the whole thing is going to be in the end. But they need to start putting together the whole thing, so their whole vision from those high-level details, in order to be sure that everything fits together in the right way. So for me, architecture is exactly that, is having in mind that type of vision where you want to end, but starting to defining how the whole parts of the system will fit together. And if you think about this from the building perspective, my wife, she's an architect. She's an architect for building. She says that I'm not an architect, because she says you don't build nothing. So I kind of build stuff. But anyway, I learned in 25 years not to argue with her about things. So she has in mind what is going to be the end building. And when I do my security architecture, I know at broader hands how that system is going to look like, what type of processes, procedures, what type of tools, what type of new systems we need to build. But we need to be sure, and I invest a lot of time in making sure that everything fits together in the right way. Otherwise, it doesn't work in the correct sequence. So to me, the architecture is the whole set of the vision, but also how everything fits together, and the set of things that you need to do to start from the overall, broad picture, and you get into the details, and being able to create that type of sequence that brings you from the initial vision, which can be typically a business vision, down to I need this type of tool in this type of situation.
Wow. Something that we haven't yet explored on the podcast. So really interesting. Now tell me, people who are watching or listening and be like, well, why should I care about this? How does this directly link to resilience?
Because if you will, to me, the concept of resilience, the word resilience is relatively new. We always talk about business continuity. We used to talk about disaster recovery. We used to talk about what do we need to do if something goes wrong, right? And to me, that had a definition that was engineering. So I'm an engineer by trade. And so where the architect has this really beautiful vision of how things fit together, the engineer comes and says, yeah, you know what, that thing is going to fall down. That thing is likely to crumple. That thing, maybe you won't have the supplier anymore. So how do you replace that? So in a way, the architect is the one that lives on the cloud and the engineer lives on the earth with us and tells them how to do that. And to me, resilience is about that, is recognizing of all the things that you have designed, what you really need in order to do whatever you are supposed to be doing. For a building, obviously, to stay as it's supposed to be staying. For a business to achieve their business goals. If I'm starting to, cut down the fat, cut down the muscles, what is the skeleton of this thing? And I think that is really interesting because in the end, when in my job as a consultant, this is exactly the first thing that I do when I go into a business. I do two things, essentially. One thing is understanding what the business does and how it operates, and then figure it out in mind what would happen if I had to define a minimum viable organization, a minimum viable business that is maybe 1/10 in size of this one, but is still trying to achieve the same mission, the same goal. And if you don't have that type of vision, it's really hard to talk about resilience because then at that point you don't know what, in terms of, like yourself, a business manager that is invested in business continuity, how do you create your own plans? From my perspective as security, how do I create my security plans to protect the system? So I don't know how much invest, where I should focus on, and so on and so forth. This is what we call a business impact assessment, typically, right? So BIA is the definition of by book. But in reality is, let's understand the business. Let's see what is the skeleton of the business. Let's draw that skeleton. And we are sure that every bone in that skeleton is fundamental, is necessary. All the other stuff is we can do without for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, so insightful. And you're definitely talking our language there with the minimum viable business. Our worlds definitely collide with that. So it's really important. Now, guys, if you're watching or listening and for a lot of people, this is probably a very highly new concept. Hence, this is why this is a masterclass. But it's really important to understand some of this more technical details, right? So you get a kind of an end-to-end understanding of what resilience is. Now, there's a lot of different layers to architecture.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what some of those layers are? For example, like apps, data, identity, networks, infrastructure, AI. Which one of those layers matter the most for resilience? Is there one that trumps overall, or is it everything?
I think that you can use different frameworks, right?
Yeah.
There is SABS, TOGAF, or whatever. Every organization has its own language from this perspective. And every organization creates their own language also because there is an overloading of terminology that is pretty common. So maybe in an organization, they talk about application layer in some context that is not the same in another organization. That said, from the architecture perspective, all the layers are important, but you are starting from the business mission, right? So everything that you do should be reconduced to the business mission. And if I do something that doesn't have a clear link to supporting the business mission, theoretically I shouldn't do that, or it should be a really minor thing. So understanding clearly the business mission, which was the first thing that I said I do, is kind of the fundamental layer.
Okay.
Then everything descends on that, but is a logical element. And again, also on that logical thing, we are culprit of trying to go too quickly into the tooling space, into the technology space.
Yeah.
You know what, I don't have this, so let's throw some money and let's buy another tool. And what happens is that if you don't have a well-architected system, you will have maybe 10 tools that do the same thing, but then you need obviously people supporting them. So you will have 10 people supporting 10 tools that do the same thing, and you have a lot of fat to cut off in that ideal skeleton that we want. So the link must be logic, but must be what I say normally orthogonal. Orthogonal means I do this and this is well defined, and then I do this, and the overlap between them is really low. So that everything is efficient. And if I need to do protection of certain elements. I do that in, by layers, but each layer must be defined in a really specific way so that I don't reuse things. Well, reuse is the wrong way. I don't overlap things, so I don't have an excessive overlapping of the same capabilities. And in essence, I don't waste resources and money.
This is so insightful, and for me, when you're saying all this, it triggers all my business continuity hat about dependencies, single points of failure. I like the cutting the fat analogy you have, and I want to ask you a very specific question here that I alluded to when I did my introduction. And the question here is, why does architecture decisions determine whether BC plans fail or succeed?
Well, it's in a way the business continuity plan are the consequence, right, of this definition of the skeleton. So if we are doing that again, that specific skeleton, the specific structure of your building without all the amenities and all the walls and so on, only the structure of your business. If you are failing to define that, as a consequence, you will say, you know what, I need a plan that is built on that idea. If the idea is wrong, your plan will be wrong. So as an architect, I'm responsible to make sure that a business continuity planner does the plans in the right way because I'm giving them the right picture. So I'm supporting them in doing the BIA, so the business impact assessment in the right way. Is a discussion with the business, because let's remind ourselves that the business impact assessment is not decided by security or by business continuity. It's decided by the business. I go to business owners and say, what is really important for you to achieve your mission? And they need to tell me. Ultimately, I don't know. Is a discussion, obviously. Most of the time, what happens is that you talk with business owners and they will tell you everything is important for them. And so,
we've heard that before.
Skeleton doesn't look like a skeleton, looks like the Michelin, Michelin body. But anyway, it's a discussion. So you need to elicit that vision from them. But in the end, ultimately, they are responsible to provide you that information. If you build that information in the right way, your business plan are a logical consequence. So they are solid. If that vision is flaky, doesn't work well, then the business plan will say, yes, I can support that, but I'm supporting the wrong things, essentially.
Interesting, isn't it? Because generally, a lot of business continuity resilience professionals don't work directly with security architects. And this is kind of why you're here, why we're building this myth, right? To get to the point of this. So quite interesting you say that, because it does shape, there's a direct link to business resilience here. Because we're giving you that minimum viable business, what we want through the BIAs, and then you're going off designing that in a sense. So we should be collaborating.
Yes, because there is mutual interest. Obviously, the thing can work only in this way, but there is also mutual interest, because obviously when you are developing a plan, probably you will need some form of support and for your remediation from the business perspective. I will need some form of support demonstrating that according to the plans that we have to sustain the business, that specific threat, that is a cybersecurity threat, needs to be mitigated at a better level rather than it is now. So probably I will need some money, some support from the business to have more people, processes, technology to do that. So that type of clarity helps everyone in the business. And to be honest, helps most of the time the business itself. Because when we teach things like risk management, we start always from the scratch, right? And the scratch is the business should have a mission defined. Okay, the business should know what they are there to do. And sometimes I ask the class, what is the mission of your business? And most of the time happens that the people that is working on the business doesn't know the mission of the business or struggles to articulate the mission of the business. So this is type of fundamental things that are probably not transmitted and not explained well from the business itself, so that even the people working in the business doesn't know exactly what they are trying to do. So it's
just one of those common problems that we all have, isn't it, right? Don't you agree? Interesting. Now, earlier I talked about hidden dependencies within this whole architectural space. Could you explain to us what some of that would look like, and why do we rely on those?
Yeah, so the work of an architect is talking 80% of the time and drawing 20% of the time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of opposite of what you would expect.
Interesting.
And so the hidden dependencies to me are always the type of information that I'm able to elicit from the business members, from the business owner, and so on. And a lot of dependency to me is the RACI matrix, the responsibility matrix. Who does what is the ownership, where it starts, where it stops, what are the gaps in that responsibility matrix. Most of the time, businesses are not aware that this is kind of one of the key information pieces in a business.
Yeah.
And you end up seeing that as an exercise because there are objectives to be met maybe in that semester or in that quarter. And it's just a piece of thing that will lay there just because it's needed, but it's really key.
Yeah.
Because the business can work in a let's say efficient way. If I don't know, these are all my responsibilities, but you need to know that this is not only for me, is especially for the other teams in the business. So an architect really can struggle, and a security architect in particular struggles really in a business that doesn't have that type of clearly well-defined structure of the responsibilities, because then at that point it doesn't know who to ask for in terms of business protection, but also who to ask for in terms of who's involved in specific events. Think about, disaster recovery, business continuity, think about crisis management and so on. All these things, they fall apart. So the lack of understanding fall apart exactly when you try to do an exercise of crisis management and people start to watch each other. Oh, it's your turn. No, your turn. No, it's your turn. Let me check the policy. Oh, I don't have a policy.
That's why I like what you said. The RACI is quite a good way to kind of bring out those hidden dependencies, isn't it? And testing those. I really like that. I don't think anyone's really come out on the show and said something like that. And I think we should be utilizing that more, which I really like that. Something unexpected.
It's defining exactly the relationships, and also not being scared of finding the gaps. So the exercises, the testings, the simulations are all there exactly to do that.
Yeah.
So people should be jumping on them straight and say, okay, it's a gap, let's fill up the gap.
Yeah.
But, trying to cover that, and when the emergency will come, because it will come, at that point it will be not a good way to discover the gap.
No, quite right. Oh, gosh. Now, I want to move the conversation forward a bit and talk about more about the infrastructure design element of things. And when we're talking about redundancy, failovers, clustering, all those terminologies, could you give us a quick lowdown very briefly on what some of these things mean and why we should care about them?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a word that is changing quite quickly, right? So when you would talk probably 10 years ago or even only 5, but let's say 10 years ago about resilience in that space, infrastructure, you would talk about on-premises data center, where you needed redundancies of your server racks, probably redundancies of your UPS and so on. So your team would look under all of these things, say what type of pieces do I have here? What type of hardware do I need to have spare parts for?
Yeah.
What type of long-term engagement with the vendor or hardware vendors do I need? Now the world has been moving on cloud quite a lot.
Yeah.
So all these things and cloud, when I'm thinking about cloud, I'm talking about PaaS and SaaS. So even the infrastructure as a service is starting to go down progressively. So all these things, they are kind of transparent at this point for whoever is going to buy the service. I don't care about anymore about hardware, switches or whatever. It's all virtualized for me. So I care about configurations. I care about who does what, privileged access management. I care about having the right monitoring, but I don't care about the. And now the world changes again. It says, do we need to repatriate some part of that hardware, that cloud? Do we need to build our own national cloud solution? Do we need to go back on a hybrid model where a part is on-prem, maybe our crown jewels are on-prem and we have full control of them? Again, the skeleton part of the system is on-prem.
Yeah, and I want you to hold that because we have a whole section on cloud, but I think you're going into that whole space. So I want to just stop there and be like, and put the caveat out there that there's a common consensus. I don't know if I would call it a misconception or not. Maybe you can help debunk this, that cloud is resilient by default. And is that a mystery? Is that a myth? Is that factual? So swiftly moving on from that, we'll go back to the previous points shortly, but since you've mentioned that, I feel like let's jump to this. How does cloud architecture influence continuity and disaster recovery? And where does it then become the provider's responsibility versus the organization's, because you're outsourcing a risk? But before you answer that, is cloud resilient by default?
I would say no. I would say, I mean, as usual, cloud is someone else's computer, right? So that's the definition. So when you are buying a service, as usual, you need to read the fine prints of the service. So there are guarantees provided by your cloud operator, and there are things that your cloud provider, I should say, they just don't guarantee you. And you need to be sure that your business continuity team, people that is after your resilience capabilities, they understand clearly what is that they are buying and what is that they are not buying. Yeah. And what is that is guaranteed and what is that is not guaranteed. Yeah. So we have seen so many things in the past, also recently with the one big vendor of cloud services that should let people understand these things. Just to me, the whole, and you mentioned that, right? So when you're talking about transferring risk, I hate the term because it seems that you are really transferring the risk. You are not transferring the risk. The risk is still yours. Yes. Because if something goes down, the business is going to be your business that goes down. It's like people saying, I'm transferring the risk with the cyber insurance. No. Yeah. It's like you're transferring the risk of hurting yourself when you're driving a car just because you have a car insurance. Yeah, well, no. You will still hurt yourself. It's just that someone else may pay for something, and then there is a full chapter on that.
I love the way you describe that, like the car driving thing. That's actually really good. And it's a very clear lesson to us that risk transfer is not transferring accountability. So it's really good. I think it's clear, crystal clear. Guys, if you're watching this and you think otherwise, then do leave us a comment because we can go up the hill and argue back up and down on that. Now, something else on cloud that's quite controversial, especially those in the resilience field, maybe in your field too, who designed this, is that about cloud patterns. So multi-regions, failover, redundancy. Where do we draw the line between what do we go for, what design, and what we don't? When does multi-region help and when does it not? Is there like a specific checklist that we should have?
I think, it's a bit difficult because the requirements of this type, they can be influenced by many different things. It's not only a business requirement, it can be also a regulatory requirement, can be a legal requirement. Think about NIS2, for example, regulations in Europe. Think about the UK cyber resilience bill that is coming in force now in UK. So there are things that can influence this type of stuff. Then there are policies that businesses operate with, which are, I need to have 2 data centers that are far away, 70, 80 kilometers, right? And maybe the vendor provides you with an availability zone that has things far apart 40. So what do? You change your policies, you go for another vendor. What do you do? So these type of considerations are pretty common. I think that the good thing, the necessary thing is always the risk assessment of things. Okay, so it's like, on what do you base your decisions on? How, if you need multi-region, if you need availability zones set in certain ways, if you need the cloud data centers are far away at this amount. what do you base that decision on?
Yeah.
Have you done a risk analysis? Does it mean that, what is for example, the distance that gives you, 90% confidence that if a tornado hits here, doesn't hit here as well, or a flood doesn't hit here. So these are all, I think that this is all the due diligence that needs to be done. Again, architecture can help that in terms of creating the structure to do this.
Yeah.
But the SMEs need to provide the content for the structure, because an architect won't know the data. Okay, won't know what is the historical data of, again, if we are talking about natural disasters, what is the historical data of flood, and then there is the other element, that is what is the risk appetite of the organization.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's an organization, a startup that is aggressively looking for growth, and so the risk appetite is really high because they don't care about these things. They just need to grow. Probably they will say, we don't even care where is the availability zone. We are happy with whatever we have. We will just jump on another thing. As soon as we grow, we will start considering this. If you think a big enterprise that is providing maybe a critical national infrastructure, the considerations are totally different.
Yeah. I do like how you pointed out that there's no hard, fast rule. It depends on, there's so many caveats. So that's really important to take away from a resilience professional point of view, that no checklist is going to fix all of this, which then leads me to my next question.
Sorry for thank God.
Because I think we'd all be doing the same thing, and we'd all be in the same position. Now, this one, like hybrid environments, right? So when we're integrating cloud versus on-prem, is there, I feel like I know what you're going to say, the answer to this, but is there also another hard and fast rule of how businesses should decide what's best for them?
Yeah, so you know that. In a way, there is no fast rule, but probably there are anti-patterns to avoid. Okay. So, and this is not even my or whatever. This was published by the National Cybersecurity Center in UK.
Yeah.
Amongst other anti-patterns was try not to build in cloud as you have built in on-prem. So let's say that you are doing a transformation program and you're bringing this whole part of your business, maybe a critical application or critical system, from on-prem to cloud. The tendency used to be, let's recreate exactly the same, even virtualized, but the same structure. I had, 1,000 servers, physical servers there. Let's do 1,000 physical servers in cloud. In reality, one of the reasons why people started to go, I would say the key reason was scaling, right? So the ability to scale. And ability to scale is related with the facilities that are provided by the cloud vendor. So you should understand the architecture of cloud and saying, I want to replicate the function. I don't want to replicate the structure. So, because that same business function can be achieved natively with other capabilities, with completely different architecture in cloud, but I need to know really well what are those facilities. And also I need to know how much do they cost. Because the other thing is hidden costs in cloud are pretty common. So the other thing to avoid when you are doing this type of interconnection and transformation is going blind without understanding this is how much we are going to pay with this type of architecture. Instead, it should be kind of one of the driving elements. Yeah,
because you could have the gold standard, but that could cost
your
whole business income.
And maybe you build up your business case on this on some assumptions that are completely wrong, because you realize that you pay a lot. For example, there is a thing. There are things that are the specific connectivity that you may have from on-prem to cloud. So Microsoft has Express Route, AWS has Direct Connect, and so on. And you pay a certain amount of money for those things and the volume of data that you passes through. If you don't have a good model of the preview before doing that, if you don't have a good model, you didn't model correctly these things, and they start to, when you have them running, it's already too late. And they can be really hurtful from the financial perspective.
Quite right. And from a resilience point of view and protection point of view, we should organizations and businesses really focus on protecting the data that they have, because you also mentioned crown jewels, where your data could be that.
Yes, absolutely correct. So there is again the regulatory element of residency of the data, but there is also kind of the element of what type of encryption, for example, do I get out of the box, and is it sufficient? Do I need to run something on my own? If I need to run something on my own, what type of facilities does that vendor provide me? Is hardware security modules, HSMs that I need to have there, I need to buy them, and is an additional application, all this type of thing. And if I need to move from that vendor to another vendor, how easy it is. So how can I avoid lock-in? This is not only a financial or strategic consideration. This is also a business continuity consideration, right? So if you had to move quickly from that vendor, how would you do that?
So fascinating. I want to move this on because I feel like the whole episode could be centered around cloud resilience, right? It's one of those things, but this is very much a taster masterclass on getting us thinking a bit differently to what we really do. Misconfigurations, like that's a terminology used often. Could you first of all give me a brief explanation of what that means, and then how is that then used? How does that, like getting that correct, if we don't get it correct, how does that cause major vulnerabilities to our programs?
Well, typically, all the scenarios, well, not that all, are S3 buckets in the AWS misconfigured that are open to anyone and everyone in the internet. Okay, so when you're talking about public cloud, you have a data center that is potentially open to the internet, right? So everybody can access that. Then you need to be sure that your configuration is considering how to close it in the right way so that it can operate for your business in the right way, but at the same time, can't have someone from another country just snooping into and taking data, encrypting data and doing all sorts of stuff. So in that scenario where we don't care probably anymore about the hardware layer because someone else is taking responsibility for that, we are still fully responsible for the configuration of things. And even if we move higher on the offer, on the deployment model, even in SaaS security, there are still elements of configuration of the users. So the user management is typically still up to the customer. Okay. And so deciding who can access that type of a SaaS, who is the administrator of my tenant in that SaaS, who has the power of removing other users or adding users that shouldn't be there, who is responsible to monitor the whole thing. These are all things that are related with configuration. And there is a whole class of new products that are, the cloud security posture management, SaaS security posture management. These are all products that are born to assess configuration issues. Yeah, okay, really interesting. Didn't realize so much went into it. So you get a bit of a appreciation of how detailed and technical some of these considerations are. Now, what about new generation tooling? What do we need to consider? What are those? What does that mean? Should we be considering those? Yeah, probably 1 week ago I would told you about these tools that I was mentioning now. Now people is talking about the last thing, the last, the last wave of things related with AI. Yeah. And it's a bit, to me, it's still all a bit foggy to have a defined position on this. Yeah. In a way, these are all tools that are born under the assumption that LLMs can provide good insights from the security perspective. Probably there is truth, so especially LLMs that are able to do code analysis, for example, they can provide some insights, but I think we are still pretty much immature in understanding what are the limits. And in a way, we are also immature. We are used, and thank God, we are used to tools that provide answers that are true. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And we have essentially for all our life against the false positives, the false negative, exactly because we had in mind that idea that a tool should give us only true positives, and we should try to limit the false positive as much as possible. Now we are facing with let's say, new wave of technology that by definition and by construction, they are probabilistic. They are not deterministic. So the question will be, do we change, or do we just, accept these things for what they are, but we retain all the technology as well? And I think we are not there yet to having decided what needs to be happening. Especially when you talk about AI, because it hallucinates a lot. And the next question I was going to ask you is about that. And will AI just be the new architect? Yeah,
like,
it's going to
is that possible?
It's going to probably help.
Okay.
It will help.
Yeah.
But it will need definitely people that understands. So I used to have my electronics teacher used to tell me that when you use a simulator, you need to know the physics that the simulator is simulating. 3 dB, which means twice in power.
Okay.
With respect of the simulator. So you need to know the limits. Okay, you need to know what is acceptable, and I can understand it, and I can accept whether this smells smoke. I cannot accept that. And I think that it's really difficult at that point, because it means that you need to be pretty senior in your career to do that. And I think the challenge we have at the moment is more related with how we make the youngsters to grow in seniority and experience in order to be able to do this type of stuff.
Because it's not going to be the answer to everything.
Yes.
You need that experience of doing it like you have. Right?
But I'm old enough to enjoy it. But I know that for a 20-something it can be scary, it can be difficult.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I think our segment on cloud is fully closed. I do feel like we could talk more on that. But I want to go back to the bit before that when we were talking about cloud and really talk about, again, AI, but how BC and disaster recovery kind of play into that, and the role of architecture. Because does a well-architected system and resilience mixed with AI create a really good ecosystem?
I think that if you have in mind good business cases or use cases, yes. Think about, for example, crisis management. Okay, in an ideal scenario, I could create a simulation where I have a set of agents, each one playing their own role in terms of parts of the business, and simulating how they would react upon what is the current body of knowledge in the organization. Okay, so this is the level of policies that you establish. This is the level of standardized procedures and SOPs and whatever that you have. Now simulate that you are this, and that. So instead of mobilizing the whole business for one exercise every 6 months, you could have these guys running and say, you have a gap here, you have a gap here, you have a gap. And could be only warning in a way, right? So as long as you know what you are using them for, then it's fine. I would start questioning having them operating on behalf of people. So, taking decisions, making assumptions and so on. This is where things get really, at the moment, we are not there, absolutely. So.
Okay, interesting, really insightful. When I introduced this episode, I talked about that if we have the systems in place, that they can either make or break us if we don't design them well. Where do our business continuity or disaster recovery plans fail because architecture design is very fragile?
Because they probably, again, coming back a bit to what we were saying on the beginning, right? Yeah. So they are probably focusing on the wrong things.
Okay.
So the planning may be there, but then when you try to execute the plan, you realize that you didn't invest enough time to provide for that specific part of infrastructure, of data, of application that instead is critical to the business. But then when you realize that probably it's too late. And again, it's not a fault of who developed the plan. The plan was developed upon a specific BIA, a specific indication.
A specific design requirement.
Yes, exactly.
Solution.
They said, look, you did the BIA for all your assets. Okay, so maybe your asset management was flaky and you didn't identify all your critical assets first. Typical scenario also shadow IT that is operating something that is fundamental for the business, but nobody maintains that. So this type of stuff. And then secondly, the architecture element that brought these things together and attributed them some form of criticality wasn't up to speed in terms of process, in terms of methodology, in terms of also buy-in. So the other thing that I always point out when I'm teaching risk management, for example, is related with the buy-in of leadership. When you do anything related with this type of, especially if it's a transformation program where you realize that we don't have a good business continuity resiliency planning, so we need now to invest 6 months to create a proper one. if you don't have buy-in from leadership, nothing will happen.
Yeah.
Nothing will happen
Quite
because
right.
you will go around in the business asking for things. People will say, nobody told me this. For me, is not a critical thing, and nothing will happen.
Is there a common misconception that about designing things, about resilience by design? Because some people don't like that. They think it's too orchestrated or architected.
I think there is, it's like security by design, right? So everybody says we are secure by design, then no, you're not. Okay, so you have the aspiration. The aspiration is a good thing to have, is an ambition, is all good, but it should be the moving force.
Okay.
Then something needs to happen, which means that those concepts needs to be actually embedded in the design.
Okay.
Now, what happens is that resilience is just a concept a bit like security. That is considered a bit down the line. And there is a reason for that, right?
Okay,
so resiliency, even if it doesn't obviously and immediately cause revenues. Okay, so you focus on things that cause revenues, right? Security doesn't cause revenues, but obviously it does, meaning that if something gets breached, you are going to lose money. But it's if you want, by negative rather than by positive. If you build something, you will make money. And people tends to focus more on those things. And this is why resiliency, security, all these type of concepts, they are, let's say, in a business, naturally forgotten. And this is why we needed to come up with concepts like security by design. It's just to tell them, look, you need to consider them from the beginning, because people was considered from the beginning all the things that would make them money. Right? So as I said, as a concept, as ambition, aspiration is all good and is the right thing to be done. Then depends how, as usual.
I love that, because it's our disciplines are very much an investment rather than like we're going to get. So the return on our investment is long.
Yes, it is.
It's a long game rather than a short game.
And there is an element of how you present these things,
yes,
right? Because when you are discussing these things with boards, with leadership, executives, the problem of trying to explain things like by negative is, if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And you're talking about disasters, you're talking about business going out of business, you're talking about all these type of things. They tend to be messages that are difficult to digest for the businesses. Now, legislation and regulation is helping us from that perspective, because at this point is not anymore a discussion about should we do this because I need to convince you that something bad can happen, but we need to do this because a rule, regulation XYZ needs to, again, or whatever is asking us to do this. So it's a bit of an easier discussion, but to me the best discussion is always, look, if you do this, this is a bit of those risks that you have in mind that goes out of your mind. Okay, if you do this, the level of, obviously, it's still a risk, it's still something that can happen, but the level of concern for you goes down and you can focus on the business. So I'm clearing your desk from 1,000 different things you need to be careful about. And at least you can focus only on the things. That type of message tends to be a bit better accepted. And
it helps in a real world situation if something does go wrong, that you've actually tried to design it by choice.
Well, it depends, because the next thing is the CEO asks you, can we be vulnerable of the same thing? And whatever answer you answer is going to be a difficult answer. Okay?
That's very true.
Because if you say yes, obviously it's, oh my God, we need to do X, Y, Z, and people go, and why are you doing this? Why are you not doing this? If you say no, you are saying something that is implicitly a lie, because it's always a risk, okay? Unless there is a critical, let's say, a critical element that you don't have necessarily in your infrastructure, and say, look, it's no because we don't have that type of thing. It's always a no because, let's say, it's unlikely because we have this type of protection. But again, it's
nuanced.
This is why I say 80% of time is talking, 20 is doing, because it's also how to vehicle the right message under the solid evidence. You have in your mind the solid evidence of things, but then you need to vehicle the message in the right way to different audiences that may not have the same type of understanding of these things.
Fascinating. Love that. Now, I want to take in real life, real world lessons learned now. So could you share an example or even a near miss when architecture directly shaped the outcome of a major incident?
Well, there are different things. So I've seen, for example, incidents related with the data breach. And so architecture shaped the outcome in terms of remediating those breaches, because obviously the things related with misconfiguration, we were mentioning that before, forced people to review completely the approach to how they were securing their data storage, who could access that. And you could do that in multiple ways, right? You could say, okay, let's do a major review and that's it. Or you could take the opportunity of an incident to say, let's take a step back. Yes, the review will be needed. Yes, we need to obviously strengthen our approach, but we need also to understand, do we have a right model, for example, of joiner, mover, levers? Do we have a right model of attribution of the rights to specific share points or stuff like that? And if we don't have it, why we don't have it? And what can we do about that? And then architecture can help structuring the approach in that point. When you see that there is that type of availability of making something good about a remediation, you can say, let's start then from, business needs. Let's structure this according, do we have the right structure of our data repository aligned to the business needs? Maybe we need to rethink about that. And then let's talk about federation with other third-party risk management. How do we treat that into the whole mix? And then architecture can help, because there are, in 1 minute, I already mentioned 10 things, right? So at some point, someone is, okay, do that, and say, where do I start? Architecture is, again, let's do the oval, let's do the lines of the head, let's do the lines of the eye, and let's start doing this.
Interesting. I like the way you explain that. I've learned so much already. I've reinforced my learnings. Now, Silvano, is there any industries that do this really well?
So I like transportation, even if it's not necessarily a mature organization. I like especially avionics, and not so much in terms of, let's say, well, obviously they have an approach on architecture which is well standardized and so on. I like their approach on lessons learned. Okay. So when an incident happens in avionics, there is obviously a full investigation. People loses their life. So there is a full investigation. But then the investigators, they publish their conclusion, and these are really documents that are almost books. So they are books of knowledge, where it's not saying necessarily I'm pointing the finger to this or that. They are exploring the issue. Then yes, they are doing recommendations, but those recommendations are typically against the regulation and say we should start integrating this thing into regulations so that this doesn't happen anymore. So it's more probably we weren't strong enough as an ecosystem, not as that specific company, as an ecosystem, to enforce this type of things. We need to do that. Obviously, I'm not saying or suggesting that all the industries, they have the same need from this perspective, but I think that the approach is sound in terms of creating ecosystems where everybody learns from someone getting breached. It's not like, they were really, low in security, so I heard things like they deserve that. Doesn't make any sense. We should make sense, or we should make treasure. Every breach is a problem, but it's also a treasure in terms of experience. So we should make treasure of that experience.
I like that. I guess they're kind of like forced to do that, aren't they? Whereas some of the other industries they should do it, but they have the bit of a luxury to make mistakes. Whereas when it's a matter of life and death, but you've got to improve.
In a way, when an industry, let's say when an organization gets breached, it's one organization, and probably there are hundreds of other organizations that are in the same, and probably they are really similar, and probably they have the same risks. So they should try to stick together and say, okay, how do we avoid that another one gets breached in the same way? So they should be, in a way, self-regulating from that perspective. And I think it doesn't matter that much in other industries, to be honest.
Interesting. What patterns determine whether an organization is very mature or very fragile?
It's hard to define. So maturity in terms of assessment of maturity, there are frameworks. There is people comes to your organization, says, okay, let's use this NIST CSF. Let's use ISO 27000. These are all frameworks. They are fine, but they are really providing maybe a small side, a small part of the whole picture. You need to do this, but you need also to make sure that you are doing continuous improvement. To me, is a big thing in terms of how do you define. Typically, is one of those things that people says, but they never do.
Yeah.
And when I do this type of assessments, I'm also interested in asking them, how do you do continuous improvement?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Yeah.
It means that how do you incorporate lessons learned of your near miss, your breaches, but also of how do we have, for example, a facility that people has to say, we should do things in this way, okay? Or are you relying on asking them?
Yeah.
Because people, especially people that work, is people that is working on things that will immediately say, we could do things in other way that could be more secure, easier for everyone, and you need to have a facility, which is, I don't know, a letterbox or whatever that allows them to explain these things.
Yeah.
And most of the time this doesn't happen. And to me, this is one of the key elements of robustness in an organization, because you have a plan, but as usual you need to see how the plan hits the road, right?
Yeah, so that maturity.
Yes,
I guess it's investing in it as well, which leads me to my next question, is about like developing this profession, and how do you retain architects and mature them, especially when like there's so much tech coming up, there's so much AI. What is going to make this profession appealing to the younger generation?
I was kind of hinting that it is a bit of a difficult moment for this. I'm part of the CISEC, which is the organization that for information security professionals in UK. I do interview people that does the chartership for the UK Cybersecurity Council. But it's all people that are, let's say, mid-senior or senior people. It's harder to find now people that has an aspiration, I want to become an architect. I mean, it happens, unfortunately, most of the time happens because they see the employment side, which, by the way, is okay, is fine. But it's harder to find the same type of, let's say, passion and interest. And I can understand it. So also because how things are moving so fast. If I were at 20-something, I would say, do I want to invest maybe 10 years of my life in trying to become something that maybe, or not doesn't have any type of working chances in 10 years or whatever. I don't think this is going to be the case. As I said, I don't believe in any way that we will have that type of specific problem, especially in the architecture side. But still, as I said, is a legitimate concern. So is probably what we try to do is education, is try to talk about the profession, try to explain what the profession is really about, because people think I'm passing all my days in designing things at the computer. No, you're passing all the way to talking to people about things. So it's a matter of being open about what is it and what is not.
How do you see then the future of the profession based on everything you've said?
To me is in a way bright. I may be over. I'm an optimistic.
I like that. The glass half full kind of man.
I'm an optimistic person, but is exactly because we are facing waves of complex new systems that people that is not well within the technology space, they don't understand how they work. So I think that there will be need for people that understand how these things work.
Yeah, definitely.
And can advise businesses in saying that use this for this and this, but not for the specific critical function, because you don't have enough guarantees that it's going to behave according to your expectations.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, the exactly like we will need people able to design buildings. Even if there are robots that can build that. So I don't believe that the robots will design good buildings. Same here.
We're just so much more complex than our program to do A to B or a pattern of codes, isn't it? Really interesting. Now, this is really, and just following up from like the future, how can we as business continuity, resilience professionals, even crisis professionals, work more strategically together with architects?
I think talking. I think that the element that sometimes happens is that there are only well-defined moments where all the security parts talk together in an organization. And instead, it should be part of a day-to-day discussion, each one from their own angle. But it's rare to, for example, to find an organization that has a Teams channel where the overall security channel is really lively. You have maybe the architecture channel that they are talking quite a lot, the business continuity channel they are talking quite a lot, GRC they are talking quite a lot, and then something happens when the CISO interact on the global one because he wants or she wants that everybody is talking together. Then there is a bit, but at that point is discussion generic. Instead, the major discussion that should happen in the major channel, in the big channel. If I had that type of magic wand to decide that, I would say no dedicated small channels or everything in the bigger channel.
Yeah.
If I'm not interested, I won't follow the thread. If I'm interested though, I know that there is a thread there that is talking about something. Even it's not impacting directly what I'm doing, I'm learning something.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm aware of something. So
because the first time me as a resilience person, a practitioner, day-to-day job, should not be interacting with you as like a security architect or the technical teams when something's gone wrong.
Yes, exactly. you at least see the day by day, and there may be a situation where an architect is talking about something and say, does he know anyone of this? And you say, I know this program, I've been on that and I can help you. So
I guess it's more like DR managers or DR professionals that come into your world rather than people who are just doing more process-driven work. But I still think it's really important to open our minds to your world. That's why we're having this conversation.
Absolutely.
I guess. Absolutely. Okay, now we're running out of time and I want to get some closing reflections from you before we go to the wildcard question. I can't wait for that. So Silvano, in one sentence, how would you define resilience by design for modern organizations?
So I don't have the sentence ready, so I need to think about that. But I would say, considering what needs to be the skeleton of the organization from the moment you design the organization. Okay, so from the moment you approach the organization growth or wherever it sits in the history of the organization, I say, have always in mind, these are the things that I really need. Okay. This is, to me, resilience by design.
I love that. The second question, before we end, what's one practical action listeners or viewers can take this week to strengthen their architecture-driven resilience?
So your architect? tell him or her that you understand them.
We'll find out who that is.
Exactly. And as I said, probably being able to create these spaces of conversation. So create a channel dedicated to everyone to chip in freely on whatever is kind of the topic, obviously related with confidentiality, blah, 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 it's pretty obvious. But say, having those spaces where everybody can chip in and especially architects can thrive understanding multiple sizes of the same stuff.
I love that. So guys, if you're watching or listening and you don't know who your architect is in your business or who that security team is responsible for that, go and find out. Now, Silvano, thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. I'm flying all the way to the UK for this. I know you have other things going on, but I just love that you casually landed here and on your way to the studio. We absolutely love that. It's time for the wildcard question. Now, the previous guest left a question. You don't know who the previous guest is because the episode hasn't aired yet. And guys, as you know, if you're watching or listening, that Silvano has no idea what the question is. So very thinking on your spot there. Let's see how good you are, because 80% talking, 20% doing, right? So here is a wildcard question, and you will get your turn to forward pay this to the next guest. So your wildcard question today from my last guest was, what is the world you want to leave for your children?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. So go on.
Yeah. So I think that I like to pass my life thinking that I've done something to improve my world. Mm-hmm. I'm concerned about the world that I'm living, to be honest. And I'm concerned of having my child telling me you didn't do enough. Okay, so rather than thinking about what I want to do is a bit by negative, but I'm trying to do my best to do something to answer that sentence when it will be the time. And I think that everybody of us does trying in their own mean to do that. But for me, paternity is something, as you know, something really more recent. So I'm starting to think this more heavily now. And probably for me, it was an afterthought before of all this type of thing. I wasn't feeling responsible. Now I do feel responsible, and all these type of things that I'm talking about, all, making security in certain ways is also to be able to, look him in the eye and say, yeah, I try to do my best.
Brilliant. I love that. And I think if you have children, it's quite easy to answer that in a way, because you want to naturally leave a better world for that. So thank you for answering that question. And a very good rapid response. I am increasingly getting impressed by everyone's quick ability to think. I guess that's why you're all on the show. Now, Silvano, it's your turn to leave a question for my next guest. So I'm going to pass this notebook to you. We're not going to expose the question yet to the audience, so we'll find out when the next guest comes. I'm going to pass it here, and then if you pass it back, if you write today's date, your question and your signature, that would be fantastic. Okay. Now guys, if you have enjoyed this episode, then you know what to do by now. Share it, make comments, and let me know what you think. Special thanks to our guest Silvano for joining us all the way from Italy. Love that. I'm going to go on this bandwagon for ages that our guest has flown in for this episode. This is me, your host, Reena Singh, signing off. And until next time, keep on investing in your resilience. Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm really intrigued what you're going to ask.
I need to sign it, right?
Please sign it, yeah. Then write your name and today's day. So you're leaving your legacy in our notebook.
Okay.
Oh, come on.
I hope you can read, because I write like a doctor. So.
Oh, that's a brilliant question. I love that. Thank you so much, Silvano.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Reena, for having me.